Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome everyone to the Club Dub Football Podcast. It's time for the recap show. All the stories, action and misadventure from the weekend's games all crammed into one great bite-sized spectacle. The guys are ready, so let's jump right in.
Well, hi, gents.
Hi, Rob.
We're all back for the recap show, and a recap show with playoff football is always going to be a bit of a spectacle. The winners move on. A number of teams from this week are one and done, including painfully the Cardinals. But I'm really excited to get your thoughts on what was a week of occasional shocks and surprises, but more often than not, those absolute NFL superpowers showing their might, and it only makes for a more mouth-watering weekend of football as we head into some really exciting ties this coming weekend. But before I get into your views, let's go through our recap of the week just gone. And what an exciting week. Riders, what were your standout moments from the weekend just gone? And Aldrin, as always, I start with you.
For me, it all went perfectly to script as I expected. There's some of those games where the good teams really rose to the top, and the ones that had maybe scraped in or had a bit of a luck of the draw in terms of getting into the playoffs kind of came unstuck. So I'm thinking, the Patriots and the Eagles particularly got a little bit found out. The Chiefs game for me was really interesting just because it felt very much like a Chiefs win of old, where they don't seem to be brilliant and then all of a sudden they put up 35 points and it's gone unanswered. That kind of had a bit of maybe a bit more worrisome for other teams, because that looks like a Chiefs team that did what it did so well when they got to the Super Bowl, and that's just not looked great for maybe a quarter, and then all of a sudden they're out of sight in the blink of an eye. There was some. I think the real takeaway for me, I guess, was the performances of some of those top quarterbacks and how they really set themselves apart. So I am thinking Mahomes. Allen at the Bills really, took his game back to probably last season's level. And then I think you've got to touch on Matt Stafford. And I know it might not be ideal for you, Rob, but kind of getting over a bit of his playoff hoodoo and also playing a pretty clean, consistent game that we've maybe not seen from him the last few weeks. So I think that will give the Rams a bit of confidence as well. And then, obviously, Tom Brady just continuing to roll back the years, make plays, albeit against one of the worst Eagles performances or any wildcard performances I've seen forever. I just thought they were awful. But yeah, lots of great quarterback play, I thought, that set good teams apart.
So the Chiefs looking like the Chiefs of old, and quarterback play were your standout moments. So JB, what were your takeaways from a pretty exciting weekend of football, but if you were a fan of a team on the losing end, a lot of these games were out of sight pretty quickly. The Cardinals and Steelers that we represent included, I suppose.
Yeah, it was one of those, it was super wild card weekend where you could quite clearly see who was super and who was a wild card. Like the Eagles didn't have a particularly great showing. I said to you and PB just as we were setting up earlier on, there were points during the Patriots and the Bills game where I felt personally offended that the Patriots had got in and put up this kind of performance and we missed out on having the Chargers in, because I think that would have been infinitely more enjoyable and competitive. I just had a quick look of the stats in comparison to scores last year versus scores this year. And last year, obviously in the wildcard round, we had the Saints, I thought it was Saints 21, Bears 9, which was the closest we got to a blowout here. And yeah, the 41-21 Chiefs and Steelers score doesn't look as bad as it could have been for the Steelers. But yeah, I kind of lumped them in with kind of the other ones in terms of it was kind of the performance we expected it was going to be. from a personal point of view, as a Steelers fan, I think I'm okay with the result. I think Large Benjamin's retirement tour went an extra stop that nobody was expecting, and I'm fine with that. Honestly, I think, obviously, yeah, it's disappointing that the Steelers aren't going to go any further, but if it wasn't this week, it would just be next week. It's, it feels, again, I think I've used this reference before. It's like Thanos. It's an inevitability.
That's the thing. I think from a Steelers perspective, you knew you weren't going to win the Super Bowl with that team, right? So it was when, not if.
It was just looking and seeing, okay, what does the team need to solve for next year? And what the team needs to solve is TJ Watt needs to be kept in bubble wrap and either kept an incredible room temperature for his entire life, because we can never let him be injured ever. And maybe look at some improvements around like wide receiver and the offensive line. Other points, I think maybe from the wild card, I think it's disappointing that Bengals and Raiders game is probably going to go down as Whistlegate, I think they're calling it now, because I think that's kind of murdered the waters on what was a really nice contest. And
a brilliant play. Aside from the refs ruining that sequence, it was a brilliant play that should have been a legitimate touchdown anyway. Yeah, watching it live, I cannot believe how he managed to do it. And I think just kind of solidifies that, like we said at the sort of this time last week, that these Bengals ain't your dad's Bengals. These aren't those same kind of tigers that have been tamed. These are maybe more a bit wild. And then I suppose the only other thing that really sticks out from the weekend was obviously how much Troy Aikman did not want to be commenting on the Bucs and how much he wanted to be in Dallas talking about the Cowboys. He did a very good job of hiding it for 3 quarters, and then, did that come out really obviously.
God, Troy gets a mention. Wow. When Troy Aikman in the box is getting a mention on our recap as one of the standout moments of the week. Although I did quite enjoy Romo on the Cowboys. I thought he did a very good job, actually, particularly in those key drives when time was a factor and different things for Dallas, really kind of dissecting how they'd work and giving armchair fans that real sense of what it's like, to be behind that O-line and making those decisions. So yeah, Troy and Tony both had their moments. PB, go on, standout moments for you in the week just gone.
Probably my team winning was a standout moment for me. I think that was definitely a highlight. I mean, it was although the Eagles came back with a couple of touchdowns towards the end, it was a pretty relaxed game. Not a lot of nerves, scoring on our first drive, I think, and then being comfortable from there on in. I mean, it was different to the previous weeks because we had our starters back on D, the guys that have been injured, and we looked like the defense from last year's playoffs. So, but if I could have picked a team that I didn't want to play in the next round, it probably would have been the Rams, because they've had our number the last two seasons. They've beaten us twice, so that's obviously going to be one to kind of be a bit nervous about. But the Rams, I think, have got the biggest travel out of anybody in anybody who has to travel for the divisional round, and they also have the shortest amount of rest between having played on Monday night and now in the early Sunday game. So we'll see what happens though. Aaron, I mean, this is for Thursday's show, so maybe I'll save it for that. But so us winning was good. The Bengals, I think it was great to see them still ball out, as they have been. A really good performance. Jamar Chase, didn't wilt in the playoffs. Joe Burrow looks really good. I think we were quick to crown Herbert as the QB1 from that quarterback class, but I still think Herbert's better. Yeah, true. But anybody who had any doubts about Burrow, I think has really come through, and I wouldn't even be surprised to see them beat the Titans this weekend. So
yeah, what I would really hate would be to be on an NFL podcast and be one of those people that had often talked about how bad Joe Burrow was and how you had no faith in. Because can you imagine hosting a podcast and having that kind of misaligned viewpoint? I mean, he wasn't good his first year. I think we were quite right to point out that he wasn't brilliant. He's had a brilliant leap this year, but it's not like he was like... prime Tom Brady. But yeah, sorry.
What I liked, my real highlight was that we just saw good offensive playoff football. You know, there were no 10-0 or 7-3. You know, I don't think any of the games were dull. I think they were all really good games, and I think it was just a good spectacle of playoff football. Great to have the fans back. You know, I think I can't remember who it was from the Eagles. It wasn't Hurts, but I think it might have been Goddard actually said, you know, they struggled early on with the crowd in Tampa. You know, there was a bit of miscommunication. They couldn't get the plays off because of the crowd noise. And that's something that, you know, has probably not been said in Tampa for about 20 years. And it was just good to have, because last year, obviously it was good. You know, the playoffs were good. There were fans in some stadia, not in others, but not full capacity. I think it was great to see, you know, a great spectacle of football in each game with packed out fans. It was brilliant. You know, fans even throwing memorabilia and things like that on the onto the field in Buffalo.
Things from home, things they brought from home. So it was nice.
Things from home.
Like,
that feels like an off-season segment for our podcast, doesn't it?
Genuinely thought Phil was talking about the Cowboys fans then. I was like, I don't think that was memorable. Oh, you're talking about something else.
It was a different take on a hot dog.
Yeah.
Some sort of a appendage that was
ask
thrown
your
in
parents.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
That's as much as we'll say.
And do you know what? You guys have done such a good job kind of rounding out with thoughts of the week. I've only got a brief one really, and it ties to yours, Phil. How we saw those really big kind of high-powered offenses really kind of play well, you know, show us what they're capable of in the playoffs. I thought was great. Listening to the podcast back last week, Aldrin, I think you made really good points about the Buffalo Bills and about that balance between pass and run and what an impact Singletary had and just how much more potent they look when they have that balance. And I mean, not even potent, I mean, historically so. I mean, they had the perfect defensive rating on PFF, you know, first time it's ever been done in the playoffs, no punts, no kick, you know, it was just a brilliant performance.
First time it's ever been done full stop, wasn't it?
I mean, and it really just was so impressive. I mean, not only Singletary kind of coming, you know, really to the fore and looking like a truly back, but also Diggs I felt was a lot more involved and, you know, it just felt like everything was clicking at potentially the right time. And in week 3 or 4, we were talking about the Ravens, you know, and how they may get it right by January. And actually, the team that we had a few doubts about early on, the Buffalo Bills, seem to have been the ones who've really hit their stride. I mean, they are truly playing their best football of the season at what could just be, you know, the perfect time. But I think, Aldrin, you mentioned it with quarterback play as well. The fact that, you know, so many of these teams relied on great quarterbacks, great play. And I mentioned it earlier. I mean, a record week in the playoffs for field goal kickers. And in an era where even an extra point isn't a gimme in this day and age, to see such a high rate of successful field goal kicks in, you know, maybe not close games, but certainly high pressure games, I think speaks volumes for just how well prepared a lot of these good teams were. So it was great to see the good look great. So let's flip this on its head then.
One other shout out based on something that Aldrin sent me this week on Instagram. The Kelsey's mother managed to make both games on the same day. So she went to the Eagles-Bucks game, got a flight and managed to get to Arrowhead Stadium in the second quarter. So managed to see both of her sons play on the same day. Incredible effort.
I mean, she hasn't got a Detroit Lions jersey half sewn into a Packers jersey, though, has she? I mean,
well, yeah.
You know, I mean, there's been a high bar set by parents in the NFL this year. But yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot. So as a final note, I think that sums our standout moment roundup beautifully. If we've looked at standout, well, whatever the opposite of that, obviously a few teams going home pretty unhappy. Where were the worst performances? We've already talked about people like the Eagles, but I guess the Eagles were, as you guys said, lucky really to get in, just scraped in. Who were you most disappointed by last week and why? And let's stick the same order. Aldrin, kick us off.
Disappointed. I mean, I might let you touch on the Cardinals because that performance was a bit dire. I think the one for me, and I've seen it coming for a few weeks, but it was particularly bad. I guess Mac Jones for the New England Patriots, just because he really looked like a rookie quarterback, a bit out of his depth. And you certainly couldn't have said that maybe weeks 1 to 6, 7, 8, because he looked really solid, didn't make mistakes, gave them a good chance to win, but without having to be spectacular. And I think the last few weeks, it's felt like he's made more mental errors, he's made more mistakes, and you get that with rookie quarterbacks. You know, I've not been Mac Jones' biggest fan, but I think he's had a really good year for a rookie that maybe you weren't expecting to be as splashy as somebody like, you know, Justin Fields and all of the talk around him. You weren't expecting Mac Jones to be a world beater, but for a good portion of the early part of the season, he looked brilliant. And I think it's maybe just caught up with them at the wrong time. Defensively, they weren't on it either. You know, I know they had a few injuries, and that isn't an opponent you want to go into with defensive injuries. But when the game was on his back, he made errors and was just all round a little bit sloppy. So I guess that was the disappointing one. Maybe like James said, you know, performances like the Steelers put up were not unexpected and also not terrible. You know, they were as kind of you would have thought they might go. But yeah, Mac Jones would maybe be the one for me, just because it was unfortunate timing that rookie slump hit just when they might want him to, you know, not even be splashy or spectacular, just consistent and do enough.
You wonder, and this is more of a carrying into next season, where that issue is really, because on the one hand, I think you've summed it up quite nicely. Earlier in the season, they weren't expecting him to do a lot. He just had to minimize mistakes. And the problem is that defensive performance at the weekend meant that minimizing mistakes just wasn't an option, was it? I mean, literally the Bills, you know, scored a touchdown on every drive, you know, so he's 7 points behind, 14 points behind. And all of a sudden, you know, that balance of run pass completely disappears. You know, they've got to try and find ways to score points and get chunk plays. And he still had some nice moments. But I think you're right that when it turns from, you know, minimizing mistakes and following the plan to having to do something more than that, to having to kind of push the envelope, set the agenda. You know, he isn't the kind of player like an Allen, a Brady, even, you know, when we were talking about the Rams and what they've been able to do, you know, he's not the kind of quarterback where you're going to be able to put a game on his back. But a weird one, isn't it? I mean, certainly, as you said, if you take the big three from that draft, I mean, the number one pick we talked about enough over the last few weeks. You know, it's not really happened in Jacksonville. With the Bears, I know there have been injuries and they've had a couple of different quarterbacks that have started games there. But again, you kind of hoped for more of a rookie splash. But actually, Mac Jones, certainly as quarterbacks go, has been the best performer. I still don't think the highest ceiling, but as you said, the best performer of the year just gone without a doubt for me. So JB, who fell at the first hurdle? We've got the Patriots, offense and defense. Where do you want to take us to next?
So I think impartially, I do agree with a bit of what Aldrin said there about the Patriots' performance. It was the worst time to have a performance like that. And you could see it like a team that's built to get a lead, hold a lead, and kind of just suffocate the offense, just being categorically unable to do anything about it. And I think, like Aldrin's right, all Mac Jones needed to go out and do was the Patriots mantra. Just do your job. And unfortunately, so they weren't able to do it. However, setting impartiality aside, I can't call that a biggest disappointment because I loved that. I thought it was fabulous. Sorry, Nick. Hope you're well. I think I'm going to kind of say officiating, I think for me was the biggest disappointment. They spent a lot of time on the various different broadcast teams that we saw over the weekend, talking about how these officiating crews are made up of the highest rated of their positions throughout the season. So this isn't the same standard crew. You might have one or two people from the main officials crew, but mixed in with other people from there. And oh boy, does that not work. You need consistency. And we didn't see this. And yes, the obvious example to go to is the horrendous call for the Bengals against the Raiders. But we saw numerous penalties that weren't penalties. We saw numerous calls that were missed or blown. There was a a rough in the passer penalty on Brady that like I think it was Derek Barnett, I think it was, like, could not have tried any harder not to hit Brady or do anything like that, and the ref still
the golden child, we can't touch him.
So let me just chime in here. I'm struggling, and it may be, you know, as we've touched on in previous pods, I'm not an NFL snob such as you guys. But for me, why does
certainly sounds like it, Phil?
Why does the makeup of the officiating crew make a difference, right? Surely they should be able to perform all together. It's the same set of rules. I don't understand how working with different people can affect the game.
Because what you're looking at is you're looking at different people's interpretations of what the rules are. If we take roughing the passer as an example, and you talk about like hitting the quarterback with undue force. Now you can look at things like that and say, okay, did he take him off his feet? Did he drive him into the ground? Did he land on him? And all of those bits and pieces. But as soon as you're asking somebody, did this happen? One person's interpretation of it is different to another's. And at least if you have a consistent crew that work together for the entire season, they at least know what everyone else is talking about. Like, there were numerous points when play was broken up, and you kind of saw this a couple of times, especially in that Cowboys 49ers game, I think, where flags were thrown and it was a discussion and it just carried on and it carried on and it carried on and it carried on. And at that point, you're getting into the thing of, well, if you're having to discuss it this much, what actually happened?
Can I just say, though, with that Cowboys game, I didn't think the officiating crew was that bad. I think the Cowboys were historically ridiculous in the amount of mental errors that they made in that game.
Oh, yeah.
Shot themselves in the foot. Yeah. And then the last play of the game, there's no problem with it. You can't spot the ball and give it to your center and go, we'll take this snap. Give it to the ref. Like, everybody knows that.
It's I get your point. People on Twitter call it out. It's the Larry Fitzgerald school of football. You do anything, you hand the ball to the official, and then you go and you line up and you get on with the next play. And yeah, I'm not in any way going down the route of, I think the officials cost the Cowboys the game. I think the Cowboys cost the Cowboys the game, and not having any conversations about Mike McCarthy as head coach is interesting, especially if he loses both of his OCs, his coordinators. That's the word I'm searching for. But yeah, just overall, it was just even more inconsistent than we've seen previously, and kind of gets us back into like circling around to Matt Stafford. You know, did Dez catch it? Yes or no? Kind of affected that Cowboys game. Did Megatron catch it? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, Matt Stafford and the Lions' career is drastically different. So they fixed that. What are we potentially going to see this season, or this off season rather, that's going to change it again?
It's weird. I certainly get your point on the communication within crews when flags are thrown. That felt more disjointed. But to your point, Phil, I think you're right, particularly when you take Bengals Raiders, which was probably, you know, the standout decision or incorrect call of the weekend. You know, whether someone's foot is out of bounds comes down to one person doing their one job at one moment in time. The makeup of the crew shouldn't really be impacting that. And I don't know, it's a weird one.
With that, I wouldn't even mind with that, with the judge that made that play, but he was literally 2 centimeters away from the plate. Like, there's no reason he couldn't see what was happening.
And the weird thing is, you got all this controversy now about, you know, should the Raiders have lost to the Bengals? You know, the Bengals, when actually the Bengals did nothing wrong. You know, they absolutely ran a brilliant play that was entirely legal, and he found a receiver in the end zone. Burrow did nothing wrong at all, and yet it becomes part of the conversation. But officiating, do you know what? Let's hope it's not part of the story this weekend and beyond, because we've got some great matchups, and it would be horrible to think some of those potentially very tight and competitive games are spoilt by officiating errors. But PB, go on, give us your shocking failures from Super Wildcard Weekend.
Dak Prescott, I don't think played particularly well, but the Cowboys in general didn't play particularly well. But But if I think of the thing that let them down in that game was discipline, they took, I mean, I think I only watched the first half live, but they took so many stupid penalties. Like, and then when they had penalties on them, they didn't capitalise. So, there were at least 2 or 3 false starts or neutral zone infractions or whatever that gave up cheap yards. But then they got a soft, I don't know if you'd call it a soft roughing the kicker penalty, right on their kind of 2-yard, 5-yard line, something like that, real close to the end zone. And they got the ball back, first down, ended up with a 3 and out. Like, you've got to capitalise. I think especially in the playoffs, you've got to capitalise on moments like that. So for me, it was, I know that the Patriots got blown out. I know the Steelers eventually got blown out, albeit, they went up 7-0 with that fumble return touchdown. But I think the Cowboys was one of the poorer performances for me because you expected them to be better. And I just think it was individual errors and costly penalties that let them down. They could have easily won that game.
It was a weird one. And my feeling watching it, very much like yours, was that there was definitely ill discipline on the Cowboys and a bit of disbelief actually on the sideline at the amount of penalties they were giving up. But watching the fourth quarter, I just felt with the mistakes that the 49ers were making, I thought one of these is going to come back to bite them. They've played so well, they've got the lead, all these things. And then they're making these mistakes down the stretch against a very talented, they didn't look much on the day, but a very talented Dallas offense. And it just never happened, did it? And actually that final play was kind of just a microcosm, wasn't it? It just kind of typified the whole day for Dallas, that nothing quite went right. And I think McCarthy being out of a job would be harsh. I think he has definitely taken the team on from where it was a year ago. But yeah, you do wonder, Kellen Moore particularly as an OC, you do wonder if he is ultimately the shining light of that coaching staff and how they would do without him, who they might replace him with if he was to move on. So there's a lot of questions for Dallas. But yeah, the Cowboys were talked about big-time quarterbacks having big-time games, Phil. I've got to agree with you. Dak Prescott didn't really live up to the billing, did it? Teams that have scored 40-plus points this year, Dallas are in that bracket. And at home, playoff game, the lights are shining bright, and it just didn't happen for them. I'll end with the, I'm going to keep this quick. I'm just going to pull the knife out quick and then you don't even feel it. The Arizona Cardinals would be my huge disappointment from the last weekend, unsurprisingly. But actually, you look back and you think a bit like the Patriots, the kind of writing was on the wall, really. The Patriots and the Cardinals particularly, even more so maybe than the Eagles, went in with not only patchy form, but actually a really poor run. If you think the Cardinals at one point were the last undefeated team in the NFL, then at another point when they went into their bye week, they were atop of the NFL at 11-2. And to end up where they did was just really disappointing. Their inability to deal with injuries when other teams have managed. You mentioned the Bucs, Phil, getting players back at the moment, but they've been able to weather injuries far better than the Cardinals. And just in a game like that, to have Kyler Murray, to have J.J. Watt, to have the kind of talent, the kind of players that you have on that roster, and to see it fall so flat on both sides of the ball. A slow starting offense, a misfiring defense, and just like the Bills against the Patriots that you were describing, Aldrin, just everything the Cardinals have done all season, just none of it was on show really in that first half. We had the Cardinals from the last 6 games rather than the first 2/3 of the season. Kyler Murray not really showing up in prime time is maybe a narrative that's going to run a bit like it does with people like Kirk Cousins if we're not careful. It was just horrible. And for as much as the secondary was beat up and you expect Stafford and Kupp and maybe even Odell Beckham Jr. to be able to feast in those circumstances, to have nothing put on the scoreboard the other way, I think just, it wasn't a contest really by halfway through the second quarter, let alone half time. And, people are saying, should Cliff Kingsbury retain his job? I think he's a bit like McCarthy in Dallas, right? He's moved the franchise on significantly in the last year. But it's like Steve Keim said in Arizona a few times, the things you learn when you're a franchise that have never won a Super Bowl is every season there's one team who gets to celebrate and 31 teams who end up disappointed. But I think the Cardinals will be particularly disappointed when it comes to how this season has petered out.
As you mentioned that about a team not winning the Super Bowl, I didn't realise this. The Buccaneers are the most successful team this century left in the playoffs.
I didn't realise this.
No, but how ridiculous is that? We've had, we had our Super Bowl season in 2002. We've had like 20 years of mediocrity or worse. We've just won a Super Bowl, and now, and we're the most successful side left in the playoffs in the last century.
In fairness, though, the only other opponent to that is the New England Patriots, who have had a historically, just only because they've gone out now, that otherwise they would have had like a ridiculous number consecutively.
Do you know the only thing it does make me think and actually I'm going to mention a team who come back in this weekend as the number one seed. It says a lot about Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers, doesn't it? In an era where they have not only had one of the greatest of all time at quarterback, obviously as the Bucs do now with Brady, but a guy who's right up there in Aaron Rodgers, some amazing receivers, some brilliant teams over the years. To only have that one Super Bowl success with Rodgers is pretty remarkable, actually.
Well, if only they'd not let Randall Cobb go, they would have won, back-to-back Super Bowls.
But as we found out in last year's, NFC Championship game, when it got to fourth down, Rodgers doesn't like taking a shot.
It's very, very topical.
I think Rodgers does.
Do you know what?
Other COVID gags are also available.
It was very nice, the way you bought popular culture references. NFL, it had everything that gets so many layers to it, Phil.
This is like the Pat McAfee show, isn't it? I mean, it's great.
I mean, I've never heard Pat McAfee's name pronounced like that, but yeah, very much like that.
I'm a Colts fan as well.
I know. Well, I tell you what, I'm really glad, Phil, you turned the conversation away from what felt like a love letter to a missed opportunity in Arizona this year.
Funny, it always comes back to the Bucs, isn't it? He's not a snob, though.
No. I mean, it's helpful when it comes back to the Bucs.
I'm just talking about teams relevant still in the playoffs.
Well, this is it. I was about to say Phil is yet again, the one left standing as all of us get to rue missed opportunities.
I genuinely hope
front office decisions. I mean, it's a horrible thing not winning the Super Bowl, Phil. I
genuinely hope that this isn't the last time I can say this, and I hope we win this week and, the rest of the games up to the Super Bowl, including the Super Bowl. But we've never done a podcast where there have been NFL games and the Bucs haven't been playing, apart from a bye week.
God, what a painful thought for all of us, Phil, that we might one day record. I mean, outside of bye weeks, I suppose, we might one day record a podcast where the Bucs aren't a central narrative thread to everything we describe. It's something that
might have to do another 30 years of podcasts until Tom Brady blooming well retires.
I was going to say, I mean, Brady, you do wonder if there's going to be a shock retirement amongst the big quarterbacks. I suppose Breeze wasn't a shock last year, was there? But Brady doesn't feel like he's the guy.
Rodgers feels like the guy that might just walk away in a huff. But,
yeah, actually, you feel like it's that, rather than their bodies giving up on them the way it maybe did with Rivers and Breeze, or certainly their throwing arms. Yeah, I wonder if Rodgers will just get bored of it. But do you know what? We now have the question that rounds out every recap show, but it's never been more relevant, right? I'm going to go around our virtual room and ask you at the moment, who is the best team in the NFL? Which is, of course, another way of saying who do you have as your Super Bowl favorite. I'm going to allow you to pick the number one seeds from NFC and AFC, should you wish, if you want to pick a team that wasn't playing this weekend. But Aldrin,
I wonder if anyone's picking the Titans.
Well,
I'm guessing no.
The Titans is an interesting shout. The Packers may be more likely. But go on, Aldrin. For your money, who is the best team in the NFL as of right now?
I think it's the Bills, isn't it? I think, like I mentioned last week, that balance that they brought back into the offense. The body of work speaks for itself over the last few weeks. They've just been absolutely lights out. So it's the Bills, 100%.
100% the Bills, Smoldering. JB, best team in the NFL?
I think it's one of either the Bengals, the Titans, the 49ers, the Packers, the Rams, the Buccaneers, the Bills, or the Chiefs.
Insightful. Yeah.
What a lovely fence you're sat atop there, James.
Just,
Good work. If only we did a podcast where we gave opinions and picked winners of things.
But this is the thing I'm struggling with. If like on February the 14th, like if we're off in the future here, someone says to me, "Oh, any of those 8 teams have won the Super Bowl," I'd be like, "Yeah, I can absolutely believe that."
You're just now talking about mathematical probability. Yes,
I will say, okay, how about this? Right, maybe not the Titans.
Really? So there's 8 teams left, and you've picked the number 1 seed coming off the bye. Well, that's brave. I think the Titans.
It's a real weak number 1 seed, though, isn't it?
They have to be the lowest thought of. And I'm not knocking the Titans here. I'm just saying that as what have to be the lowest rated of all of the seeds, and the most underrated maybe to a degree, like you wouldn't put them on the same level as like the Bengals or the 49ers or the Bills or anything like that, would you?
But the only thing I will say, and we don't want to make this too much about the Titans, we've got shows that will cover the Titans coming up on Thursday, but I will say that Titans team without Henry, and I know they were without receivers, without Brown and Jones at times as well. So with all the injuries they had, they probably weren't a particularly exciting looking roster from probably mid-season, a little later, and they still went and got the number 1 seed in the AFC. I think they'll take some beating, but I'm with you. I think I probably have AFC teams like the Bills, Chiefs, maybe the Bengals ahead of them. Find out on Thursday. So anyone but the Titans for JB. PB, who is the best team in the NFL?
I think for me, it's hard to look past the Chiefs. They seem to have got it together a little bit. I know the Bengals beat them in week 17, I think, wasn't it? But the Chiefs look really good. The way they kind of took the Steelers apart. You know, Mahomes was looking back to his tricky self. There was that play where he kind of opened out as if I think he was going to throw, you know, a normal sidearm or a sidearm pass to Kelsey that pulled TJ Watt out of position, and he just throws that little underarm pass to McKinnon for the touchdown. Like, you know, I don't think we saw them doing stuff like that early in the season when he was throwing picks left, right and centre and they were getting beat. But, you know, they look like that kind of scary Andy Reid, you know, can just do anything kind of offense. The offensive line still looks a little bit ropey, I think. But for me, they're probably, I know the Bills dismantled the Patriots, but as we've already said, the Patriots didn't play particularly well. For me, I think the Chiefs are the team that I probably wouldn't want to beat, wouldn't want to face. But don't sleep on the Titans, Aldrin. You know, they're coming back with a fresh Derrick Henry. And you look at how Akers...
They're coming back with maybe Derrick Henry.
Well,
yet to train, yet to see. Henry. He was not predicted to be in the mix. The fact that he's back and off the list is incredible, but whether or not he actually makes the game is a different kettle of fish.
Oh, that's fair enough. I just assumed he was going to be back and kind of firing, but we'll see, I guess. I don't know. I you know, they're the number 1 seed for a reason, and they've coped with a lot of injuries this year, so they've obviously got a good unit, but yeah, I can see the Bengals beating them.
So I'll round out...
It's that weird... Sorry, I was going to say, it's that weird thing, and we'll probably cover the Titans, but when I was talking about, you know, stellar quarterback play really defining this week, I think next week, if Tannehill's the guy that you're wanting to be the great leader, I don't think he's got it in him, but maybe we'll see.
Yeah, you need more than luck to be the number 1 seed. But yeah, maybe I don't have the Titans as high as I should. But I tell you what, I'm going to say this, and this has kind of flipped for me from last week to this. We were talking about how it was much more competitive NFC side getting into the playoffs only about a month or so ago. I think the teams that are playing best, that are on an absolute roll at the moment, are the Chiefs and the Bills. Both obviously in the AFC. I think I'm going to have to say the Bills, the best team in football at the moment. Yeah, the Patriots weren't great, but a statistically perfect offensive performance. Touchdowns on every drive, the variety of plays, the run, the pass, just the ability to do what they wanted, to really exert their will. Yes, the Patriots were bad, but they've still got Bill Belichick and some talented defenders. I think it says an awful lot about where Buffalo have climbed to. So the best team in football, just about with 2 votes of the Buffalo Bills. So before we round out, we've got historic news, only the second time ever. JB, talk us through the runners and riders from our pick'ems last week.
Well, it was a very interesting week at the halfway point. Aldrin and myself tied at 3-0. One of us, very bold, made some decisions that didn't quite pan out, whereas with the other of us, stuck to the mainstream a little bit, didn't really put themselves out there. But we can say historically, we have had a sweep yet again. Aldrin with 6-0. Heading off Rob and Phil, who went 4-2, and I went 3-3 because it really didn't work out for me in the end.
Oh, don't tell me you picked the Cardinals. Is that?
Yeah,
that was his error.
Oh,
I picked the cow. That's it. I had the Bengals, the Bills, and the Buccaneers, which was great, and then went Cowboys, Steelers, Cardinals, which went terribly.
yeah, Steelers Cardinals feels like the errors in that. But Aldrin, wow, 6-0. You kind of wonder if that gives you an unassailable lead in our Pick'em playoff contest. I mean, that is strong. With not many games, that 2-game lead could prove critical. But of course, you got to join us all on Thursday night, where you hear who we're putting in Club Dub on our prediction show. Coming into, and this has been mentioned by a number of you, probably as exciting a divisional round as I can remember. Teams on the up, teams in form. You know, every fan base of the 8 that remain dreaming that this could be their year. So I can't wait for football this weekend. But thank you, gentlemen, for your company. Another gold standard stellar performance, and I'll catch you all to pick some winners on Thursday night.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is amazing. Woo!
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game